Welcome back to the Adam Schefter Podcast, and Happy New Year to everybody. Happy NFL New Year. I know the new year starts on January 1st, but the new NFL year starts Wednesday, March 12th, and as some people have said, that's the start of free agency, 4 p.m. Eastern, Wednesday, March 12th. But in the NFL world that we now live in, by the time we get to the start of NFL free agency at Wednesday, March 12th at 4 p.m. Eastern, free agency is over, essentially. There are still any number of good players out there, but the high-priced, big-ticket, high-profile names are all essentially off the board, accounted for, and entered into agreements with teams across the league. And it used to be in the NFL that the start of the new league year always represented the most activity. But like everything with the NFL, the timeline has become more accelerated and more warped. Coaches get fired earlier than ever before. Players get traded way before the trade deadline. Everything is ramped up in the NFL, including the pace at which teams make moves leading up to the start of the NFL new year. So while the NFL year starts on Wednesday, March 12th, effectively, it's been going on for the last couple of weeks as teams remake their rosters in an effort to take the next step in 2025. And we're going to touch on all the big moves, all the big trades, all the free agent defections and signings that have occurred here in recent days and weeks with my friend, the co-host of the Pat McAfee Show, Ty Schmit, and the man who leads us on the weekly six-pack.
Thank you very much, Shefty. It's good to see you as always. Listen, you mentioned it. This is arguably the most exciting time of the year. I mean, every time you check your phone, hey, this guy's moving to this place. This guy's signing with this place. You know, it used to be you only get this kind of stuff in like the NBA, and very rarely would we have a bunch of changes. I mean, there'd be one or two, marquee, high-profile free agent signings in NFL in years past. Now it's like, it's a laundry list. I mean, it's 2 pages long of these big name household names that people know that are changing teams for massive deals. I love it. If you're a fan of a team that didn't win a Super Bowl, this is, hope springs eternal. This, you can look at your team and say, hey, if we just add this piece, if we just add this piece, if we just add this piece, then maybe we win a Super Bowl next year. Let's move on to topic number 1, Shefty. And let's start right at the top. The world champion Eagles, they have lost a ton of talent. We kind of knew this was coming. It's almost like that old adage, hey, if there's money to go around to everybody if you win, it just might not necessarily be here. And that's kind of been the case with the Eagles. In your opinion, why should fans maybe not be as concerned as you would be in years past?
Listen, when you win the Super Bowl, there's a price for winning the Super Bowl. And that's the fact that other teams want your players. And we've seen it already. The Eagles lost Milton Williams to the New England Patriots, which we're going to get into with some more insight next. They lost Josh Sweat to the Arizona Cardinals. They lost Oren Burks. They lost Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who they traded to the Houston Texans in a move that surprised a lot of Eagles fans. They've moved on from a lot of players. Here's the deal. The 49ers have done the same thing. When you are paying as many players as these really good teams are, and the Eagles are paying their quarterback Jalen Hurts, their running back Saquon Barkley, their wide receivers A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, their offensive linemen Jordan Mailata, Landon Dickerson, they're going to pay Cam Jurgens, Lane Johnson. How many guys can you pay? And they just re-signed Zach Bond, their great inside linebacker last week, to a huge deal. So you have to find ways to make up for it. Not everybody can get paid. And so what the Eagles did, actually, I think was pretty smart. They tried at some point to bring some of these players back. Milton Williams, before the season began, the deal didn't work out. He was going to become a free agent. Josh Sweat was going to become a free agent. Oren Burks was going to become a free agent. Some of the players they lost. But do you realize that on Monday, the open start of the negotiating window, when they lost Milton Williams and Josh Sweat and the cornerback Isaiah Rodgers to the Minnesota Vikings, they wound up getting 3 compensatory draft picks that day, or will be getting in 2026. 3 compensatory draft picks. They haven't been awarded yet, but they will. And once those are awarded, Well, we still might see Mekhi Becton leave. We're waiting on a free agent destination for him as well as we tape this Wednesday morning, and it sounds like he could be leaving as well. But right now, before Becton, the Philadelphia Eagles are scheduled to have 20 draft picks in the next 2 years, Ty. 20 picks. Most teams in a given draft have 7. The Eagles have 20 the next 2 years, including 11 in the first 4 rounds of the next 2 years. 11 and 17 in the first 5 rounds the next 2 years. You know what those picks do? Those picks give you a chance to bring in good young players on rookie contracts that allow you to pay the veteran superstars. So they're planning on these young players stepping in. And who has had a better drafting record than the Philadelphia Eagles? 20 picks the next years. And by the way, it's probably going to turn into more once they lose Mekhi Becton. And who knows how they're going to manipulate the draft this year and potentially turn it into more picks next year or the year after. So this was, I think, part of the plan for them to move forward like this. They're the world champions. There's a world champion tax to pay, and that is that other teams want to give your players more than they ordinarily would get. The prices on them in free agency usually get jacked up, and that's exactly what happened this year with the Philadelphia Eagles.
Well, and we mentioned it a couple weeks ago, Shefty. When you are hitting on all these draft picks like they have been, you want to keep those guys. You want to pay your homegrown talent for the message that sends to the locker room, for your culture as a whole. So, I mean, look at, they had 2 rookies playing in the defensive backfield in the Super Bowl who had massive impacts and were great all year. Like they're going to want to pay those guys when they come up. Jalen Carter. So when you're that good and you have an embarrassment of riches, obviously a lot of tough decisions come with that, and you kind of just have to pick and choose. And that's the way it goes. Guys who made a lot of money in the Super Bowl I think probably knew, like, hey, there's a chance I'm going to be making a lot of money on this next contract with a different team.
And you mentioned some other names. They're still going to have to find a way to pay Cam Jurgens at some point this summer. They know that Jalen Carter is going to come up next year. That's going to be a huge deal. Nolan Smith is going to be a huge deal. And I know it's only 1 year, but doesn't it look like Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean had the chance to get paid after they're 3 years into their deal? So there's a lot of players that they're going to have to pay. They know this, and they have the 20 draft picks the next 2 years to help find a way to help afford all the players who are going to get paid in Philadelphia.
Let's move on to topic number 2, Shefty, and circle back to someone you talked about there. Milton Williams, who was kind of the darling, I feel like, of this free agent period. I don't know if that many people were aware of who he was before the playoff run. And then post-Super Bowl, we mentioned it on this show. It was like, hey, this guy's going to make a lot of money in free agency. What is the backstory of Milton Williams and how he got to New England?
Well, that story, his journey, generated quite a bit of attention on Monday because of all the back and forth, right? Even on your show.
Yep.
So I just wanted to just explain to you exactly what was happening. The Carolina Panthers were working to try to finalize a deal with him, which is what I said. After I said that, there were other people that said Milton Williams is signing with the Carolina Panthers. Go back and look at what I said. They're working to finalize, which they were. And you know what happened? When that tweet goes out, other teams step in. And the Patriots upped their offer. And the Patriots were not going to be denied. And the Patriots, who were willing to go up to potentially 28, 29, $30 million a year for Chris Godwin before he went back to Tampa, weren't going to be denied after they lost out on Chris Godwin when they already offered him $6, $7, $8 more million per year than the Buccaneers were willing to pay him. So they got outbid on the wide receiver that they wanted, and now we're seeing reports of Carolina working to finalize a deal, which they were, except Arizona still was involved and New England still was involved. And when New England saw that it was close, its offer went from 24 to 25 million to 26 million, where it eventually came in. And that's why free agency is always fluid. That's why even when you see stories of players reaching agreements on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday, nothing is official until that player signs. There are teams that still try to flip the minds, change the minds of free agents that they're going to lose who enter into agreements with teams. The 49ers tried it with Dre Greenlaw, making calls to Dre Greenlaw, talking to Dre Greenlaw, trying to flip his commitment from the Denver Broncos back to the 49ers, who they had 8 months to try to re-sign. And the 49ers went all in on Dre Greenlaw after his agreement was announced with the Denver Broncos to try to flip it, but couldn't get it done. And so that's the danger of these types of situations and the language and why it's important. Working to finalize a deal can be true. Reaching agreement can be true. But it doesn't mean it's final and binding until after the new league year begins and the player signs his contract. It feels like every year there's a player that somehow reaches an agreement, that thinks about it, changes his mind, and flips his decision. I remember Anthony Barr changing his mind. He was going to sign with the New York Jets until he didn't. Wound up going to the Minnesota Vikings, back to where he was. It happened last year with the Dallas Cowboys and somebody. I'm drawing a blank, but the fact of the matter is this is a regular occurrence. So Milton Williams, the Panthers were working on him, and they were trying to finalize that deal. But the New England Patriots, who already lost Chris Godwin, who already were willing to pay him more, were not going to be denied. They were going to pay and pay and pay until they got Milton Williams. And who would have ever thought that Milton Williams, who's a great player, but that Milton Williams would become the highest paid player in Patriot franchise history? Think of all the great players who have passed through New England in recent years. Tom Brady, Rob Gronkowski, any number of defensive players that helped that team, all the great offensive linemen, Randy Moss. And the highest paid player that franchise ever has had is Milton Williams.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I guess that's what happens when you have 160 million plus in cap space. But Shefty, is there a world where if you don't put that tweet up that says, hey, the Carolina Panthers are trying to finalize a deal with Milton Williams, do you think it's possible that the Patriots stand pat with their initial offer and then they end up losing out on Milton Williams?
I do. Yeah, I do. I think every team is paying attention to all the reports from all the reporters during social media. They're charting it. And just like the 49ers saw the reports that Dre Greenlaw has reached an agreement with the Denver Broncos, didn't stop them from then trying to go back in to talk to Dre Greenlaw to see if they could flip his decision. So yes, part of it is monitoring these things. And when the negotiating period opens, nothing's allowed to be final. So it is something of the Wild West. Now, people's word should matter. And to most people, it does. Most people. But every now and then, you don't know how that's going to go. We see it happen in the sport all the time. So it's just part of the business. It happens every year. Yeah, again, the Panthers were working to try to finalize that deal. And Arizona also was there. And New England kept going and going and going. And New England, in the end, wasn't going to be denied. And it gets to a point where Carolina says, you're going there? Out. I know we want to get this done. Arizona says, you're going there? We're out. And New England has the winning hand.
Yeah, and I guess, we always talk about it with the draft where, hey, it only takes one team to fall in love with you. But if 2 teams or 3 teams fall in love with you, that's when you get in a really good spot. Same thing goes for free agency. One team, and we want to talk about people getting overpaid, but when you can't sign your deal or it can't become official until Wednesday, like these bidding wars can happen. You have multiple days to kind of really mull over things and say, hey, do we want to go there? Do we want to maybe up this offer a couple $1 million? So that's an interesting situation, and we'll see. I mean, that it is crazy to think that Milton Williams is the highest paid Patriot of all time.
But sometimes the price gets to a level that even Carolina or Arizona isn't going to get to with New England and Milton Williams. Sometimes it's a case where there's an agreement and a team like the 49ers doesn't want to take no for an answer and keeps trying to get that guy to change his mind. So there are different situations with every player. And sometimes the player flips, more often he doesn't, but there's a lot of different situations. Language is very important in these things. The way you say these things are happening is very important. There's a lot to all these stories that unfold. There's stories behind the stories.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. Something to keep in mind, for next year too, when this kind of stuff inevitably pops up, which I'm sure it will. Let's move on to topic number 3, Shefty. You were kind of, right on this from the get-go, saying, hey, listen, Myles Garrett's not going to get traded. Like, just the chances of that happening are slim to none. It turned out, in the end, it was a lot of posturing with him not wanting to go back there and him wanting to go somewhere where he could compete to win a Super Bowl. I'm not saying that, somehow the Browns couldn't, be in that position in the future, but $40 million a year gets the job done. Money talks, obviously. How did this unexpected Myles Garrett deal come together?
Well, I think this probably was the biggest surprise of the last couple of weeks, because all we had heard about since the start of Super Bowl week was how Myles Garrett wanted to be traded. It wasn't about money. He wanted out of Cleveland. He wanted to go play for a winner. And then lo and behold, on the Sunday morning before the new league year opens, here it is, a new record-setting deal for Myles Garrett that resets the market, that makes him the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history. A huge deal gets done. Now, I began to get word on Saturday that something was going on. And I think on Sunday, they were able to cap off the agreement, get it done. And ultimately, what it comes down to is if we think back to most players in the National Football League, I think basketball is different. I think basketball is different for whatever reason. It's an interesting conversation. But in the National Football League, did we not hear Deebo Samuel say he's not going to play again in San Francisco before he signed a new deal? Did we not hear Brandon Ayuk say he's not going to play there before he signed a new deal? Did we not hear Lamar Jackson send out a statement as John Harbaugh was about to have breakfast at the owners' meetings with all the reporters saying that he wanted out of Baltimore and wouldn't play for the Ravens again, only to sign a new deal about a month later? And I think the lesson is, in football, usually these situations work out in the end. Usually money helps heal and solve the situation. Not always, but usually. There are the occasional situations like a Carson Palmer where the player is so dug in and so principled that there's nothing that can get him to change his mind. That does occasionally happen. But more often than not, when an NFL player issues a trade request, it's great fodder for your show and our shows. It's something we could talk about. We could wonder where that player might be traded, wonder how he fits into each respective NFL franchise. But we have to know that in the end, the truth of the matter is it's probably going to work out with that team. We heard Trey Hendrickson ask for a request. Now, that's still going on, and we'll see how that plays out. But the longer that goes on, and the more teams fill their pass rushing needs, like Buffalo landing a deal with Joey Bosa, the 5-time Pro Bowl defensive end, the more that happens, the fewer opportunities and landing spots there are for a player like Trey Hendrickson. So in the end, it's possible Trey Hendrickson just goes back to Cincinnati, just like Myles Garrett went back to Cleveland. And for weeks, we've been wondering, where is Myles Garrett going? Where is Trey Hendrickson going? Trey Hendrickson still has time to try to work out a trade, but let's not just rule out the idea that he could also be back in Cincinnati as well.
Without a doubt. And, $40 million a year, you're going to have a lot of people, a lot of NFL players, like, who's turning that down? Even if it's with the Browns, even if it's in a situation where you maybe don't think, you can win. And if you're the Browns, with the quarterback uncertainty, with Deshaun Watson and all that kind of stuff, like, they really couldn't afford to lose him. I mean, he's a cornerstone piece of the franchise. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer. Like, I understand they're kind of going into like a mini rebuild here, but if you lose him, we saw Denzel Ward say, well, if he's out, I'm out, and then who knows what kind of domino effect that causes, where it's like, it goes from, hey, if we hit on a quarterback, maybe we have a chance to compete, to, boy, we're going to be in the dark here for the next, who knows, 5 to 10 years.
Teams should be in the business of acquiring and keeping Hall of Fame players, not trading them away. And the Browns, to their credit, held their ground, figured out a way, and got a deal done to keep the best defensive player in the game.
And like you said, that was a fun pipe dream for all those teams out there who needed a pass rusher and thought, hey, maybe
Great conversation for us, but never really going to happen, Ty.
Yeah, without a doubt. So I feel like a moron after the fact, pontificating that, hey, maybe the Packers give 2 1s and a 3 and a 4 and get Myles Garrett. It was never going to happen. But it's still fun to talk about. Let's move on to topic number 4, something just as unexpected, maybe even more so unexpected. How do you explain the trade of Laremy Tunsil to Washington? That seemed like it came out of absolutely nowhere.
That was a nowhere trade. All of a sudden, later in the day, you began to hear something was percolating. And Laremy Tunsil is a guy, I remember when he got traded from Miami to Houston. He had wanted a new deal. It came on final cutdown day. It was a blockbuster deal. And now there's another blockbuster that comes when it was not expected, when nobody was talking about it. And the Houston Texans essentially had been quietly shopping Laremy Tunsil. Nobody really knew it. Nick Caserio kept it quiet. It reminded me of the way that the Mavericks went about their business with Luka Doncic. Now, they only spoke to the Lakers. I don't think that Nick Caserio spoke to very many teams at all, but clearly Washington was one, and he made it very clear, don't want anything getting out. They talked to the Commanders. They get the deal done. And look, Houston's offensive line really struggled last year, really struggled. But they've made a number of changes. They trade away Laremy Tunsil. They trade King and Green to the Philadelphia Eagles in the Chauncey Gardner-Johnson trade, and they cut Shaq Mason. So they're remaking their offensive line. I think they liked Laremy Tunsil, but they knew that with all these other offensive linemen in the league being paid top dollars in this free agent market, like Dan Moore in Tennessee and Jalen Moore in Kansas City, that they were going to have to deal with financial disputes and questions with Laremy Tunsil. So before that even happened, they traded him to Washington, who was only too happy to have him to protect the blind side of their great young quarterback, Jaden Daniels. The Texans get back a whole bunch of draft picks in an offensive line draft where they're going to be able to find some help there. And they're going to remake their line here. And they're going to do it in part through the draft. And they move on from Laremy Tunsil. But just like there's a player that usually sometimes flips his decision, every year there's a trade that comes out of nowhere that you didn't see. And it happened to be Laremy Tunsil, who will be in the Hall of Fame one day, great offensive line. And think about the career he's had. Right? I remember on draft night, that was incredible. People were talking about him as the potential number 1 overall pick. And then literally, as the draft is beginning, the video surfaces of him smoking a bong. And now every team's got to find out while they're on the clock whether or not they're willing to roll the dice on a player like this with questions that are pending. He goes to Miami. I think it was pick number 8. Which was still later than he was projected to go. He gets traded to Houston, which nobody was expecting. Nobody's expecting him to get traded to Washington. We had Laremy Tunsil as a guest on this podcast, had a lengthy conversation. He is incredibly smart, incredibly personable, really liked him, but he's had one hell of an NFL journey.
And, anymore, like getting traded to Washington, I feel like that used to be almost like a death sentence a couple years ago. Now you look at what they're doing, like, there's not a whole lot of people that probably don't want to wind up in Washington playing for Dan Quinn and playing alongside Jaden Daniels. Like that's a pretty enticing spot for a lot of people looking for a new home.
And that's a great point, and that may be the most significant thing that Jaden Daniels has done playing quarterback for Washington. He's made Washington a destination. We haven't talked about Washington like that since the mid-1990s when Joe Gibbs was the head coach and they were winning Super Bowls with guys like Mark Rippon and Doug Williams at quarterback. They've made it such that if you're a player and you get traded to Washington, you're happy. If you're a free agent, you're looking at Washington. Dan Quinn, the head coach, Adam Peters, the GM, Jaden Daniels, the quarterback. Congratulations to all of them because they've changed the image and reputation of that franchise. Welcome, Laremy Tunsil.
Yeah, it's awesome. I feel like Washington is one of those teams where the NFL is just better when they're good or when they're in the conversation. They were bad for so long. So it's cool to see guys if Deebo Samuel would have got traded to Laremy Tunsil too, but if Deebo Samuel would have got traded to Washington 2 years ago, can you imagine what the discourse around that would have been and how pissed off he would have been? And now it's like, can't wait to get there. Can't wait to play with Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin. So it's cool, but it's also crazy how quickly things have turned over there. Speaking of things turning over very quickly, let's move to topic number 5. What is going on in Seattle, Shefty? No Geno,
Wow.
no DK, no Lockett. I mean, it really is, this is a completely new thing with Mike McDonald. Very few of like the, I guess you could say generational players who helped, keep Seattle on the map for a long time. They're going to look much, much different next year. What is going on up there?
Well, I think it starts with the quarterback, because the quarterback was the one that they wanted to keep, Geno Smith. And sometime around the combine, at the combine, that Friday of the combine, they had a meeting at about 5 Eastern with Geno Smith as representatives to go over a new contract. And I think they offered in the low 30s a contract comparable to the one that Baker Mayfield had with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And in the end, Geno Smith was looking for, I think, about $40 million a year. And the Seahawks weren't going to go there. And I think Geno Smith felt disrespected. And I also think, look, in this day and age, his former head coach was going to be in Las Vegas. He knew that. So if you think that somehow messages aren't communicated, hey, we want you, we'll pay you, I think it's a little naive, because that's just kind of going on. So Geno Smith knows he's not going to get what he wants from Seattle. He knows or has an idea of what else is out there. And when you know that you have a former coach out there who wants you, and you know you have an idea to get what you want, it's very easy to say to Seattle, I'm not taking that offer, and I'm not going to take that offer, and I'm not happy, and I feel disrespected, and I want out. Now, the way it was explained to me, he never actually issued a trade request. That never happened. So I don't think it unfolded that way. I just think that it was a case where they knew they were going to have a tough time with Geno. They knew what was out there in Seattle. They knew the situation. So that was the start of it. And DK, there's been talk about a DK trade for the last couple of years. And you notice how when he issued his trade request, Seattle didn't fight him on it, right? We saw the Niners fight Deebo and Brandon Ayuk. We saw the Ravens fight Lamar. The Seahawks, you want to trade? No problem. Let's get on the phone. And within a few days, they made the trade happen. You notice that?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Now, DK is an unbelievable wide receiver, talented, gifted, but I think in judging the Seahawks' actions, they had no problem moving on from him. You want to trade? You get a trade. So I think that tells you something about the way that they felt. So there was nothing they could do about their quarterback. The wide receiver they were fine with, and they released Tyler Lockett. And you know what? Sam Darnold was somebody that they had their eye on. Their offensive coordinator is Clint Kubiak. He worked with Sam Darnold in San Francisco. He loved him there. So there was a relationship there. So Geno Smith went back to the relationship he knew in Vegas. Sam Darnold went back to the relationship he knew. And let's give Seattle some time to solve some of its wide receiver questions that it's still sifting through. Definitely question marks. You can't just trade DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, release him, and think that you're going to be better at wide receiver. But there's still time for this team to come up with more receivers. And at the quarterback position, they got 8 years younger and got a third-round draft pick and got a guy signed for the next 3 years, which they were going to struggle to do with Geno Smith.
And Geno kind of had, they hadn't given him a long-term deal. It seems like we've been kind of doing this dance with Geno Smith every offseason with the Seahawks. Said, okay, we'll give him an additional 2 years, and he's not exactly getting the money that he wanted. The DK thing, like you said, I think, that was kind of we were just waiting for that to happen. And when you look at the emergence of Jackson Smith and Jigba, it kind of makes sense. If DK wanted 30 a year, is that really what you want to do when you're kind of trying to turn over a new leaf with the franchises, commit $60 million a year to your receiver room because he's going to be coming up here before too long. He's going to want a new deal. So it certainly makes sense. It is kind of crazy because it's not a complete rebuild, obviously, when you go out and you give that kind of money to Sam Darnold, but it's just going to be weird watching Seattle next year without a lot of these, pieces that have been there for so long. So who knows? I think Mike McDonald, a lot of people respect him. Obviously, Clint Kubiak, they have a new OC, so maybe that had something to do with, the Geno situation, because we saw the comments he had about Pete Carroll. I mean, he loves Pete Carroll, and he would, go to war with him any day. So it seems like, in the end, not a whole lot of bad blood. Kind of everybody got what they wanted in that situation, and we'll see what Seattle does. Like you said, a lot of time to still kind of figure out what they're going to do with their roster. All right, Shefty, let's move on to the sixth and final topic of this week's Six Pack. As of right now, what are your biggest free agent takeaways?
Ty, I got a few of them. Let's start with the fact that DeAndre Hopkins gets done a 1-year, $5 million deal up to $6 million with the Baltimore Ravens. If you are Stephon Diggs, if you are Keenan Allen, if you are Brandon Cooks, you're probably looking at that deal saying, wow, my market value just got stunted a little bit. It's hard to ask for top dollar as a veteran free agent when DeAndre Hopkins got $5 million a year. Now, we'll see if one of them is good enough and in demand enough to overcome it. We'll see. But that's a tough spot to be in. Running backs, very soft market. Javonte Williams gets $3 million a year. Najee Harris gets $5.5 million. That could grow to $9.25 million. J.K. Dobbins turned down offers because he didn't think that they were good enough. And so there are a whole bunch of running backs that are still just sitting there. And we're in a market where the draft is so deep at running backs that teams are hesitant to pay veteran free agent running backs. Aaron Jones did a deal on Sunday for $10 million. Probably a very wise move to get that done and out of the way and not have to worry about losing your job or not getting the money you want. So veteran wide receivers, tough spot. Running backs, tough spot. And you see where the big money went right away. It was cornerbacks, pass rushers, offensive linemen, the positions in the trenches, the positions that teams are trying to fill, veteran wide receivers and running backs just not getting paid in free agency. And it was, I'm going to speak from a personal standpoint about the whole week. Sunday morning, I woke up and I was dealing with the Myles Garrett thing. And I got the new phone last week, which we talked about, the 16. My other phone, for whatever reason, shut down on Sunday morning. So I have an 860 phone number that all of a sudden went on the fritz. And I couldn't get it to work, and I was about to go to Bristol, and it's a Sunday, and I don't have time to go into the shop, and I'm flipping out. Now, somehow, some way, I did a hard reset. It came back up. But I get up to Bristol, and I check into the hotel, and I work Sunday, and Monday morning, I go into Bristol at 6:30 in the morning to the headquarters, and I go to put on my Navy freshly clean, crisp suit that I packed up. I'd taken 3 suits, and I always worried about this with Monday Night Football when I would pack a suit or two. I always worried that there was an event that my son and I attended, and my son is twice the size I am, that we got matching suits. And I always wondered and worried that I'm going to have his suit. So I took out my Navy suit to get dressed on Monday morning, start a free agency, really, on Monday. And I go to put it on. I'm like, wow, this waist on these pants is way too big. Oh, these pants are way too long. Put the jacket on. The arms are hanging over my own hands. I said, oh, my God, I took my son's suit to Bristol. Oh, my God. So now I lose the suit that I wanted to wear that I picked out. You want to feel comfortable in what you want to be in that day. So that didn't work out. And then we go into ESPN headquarters on Monday only to find out that Twitter is down. So now we're having to chase down NFL news, track it while you're trying to figure out how to dispense it and get rid of it. So there were all sorts of little hiccups, complications that just kind of really messed up the whole week. It was just a weird week, and it's all crazy, but I'm glad we're now returning to some sense of normalcy. You could still see the bags under my eyes here. See those, Ty?
Oh, yeah.
Those are big. I know, and I know you've
working hard.
We're all thinking of you this week as well, and hoping for the best as well for that. Thank you for making the time this week. This was a crazy one, Ty.
Yeah, without a doubt. Well, and like you said, Shefty, Twitter going down on Monday was,
bonkers.
I don't know if you could pick a worse day for it to happen. And for what we do, God, that was rough. Refreshing every 2 minutes. Oh, still not up, and then having to just figure out how you want to get it done. Hey, maybe I'll go to the live blog on ESPN.com and hopefully. But anymore, like everyone's getting their information from Twitter, so it's kind of one of those things where if you're not an insider, if you're not one of like we're not calling GMs, we're not calling agents, so we're just at the mercy of that. Luckily, it got back up and running. And I think all things considered, it was a pretty eventful and a pretty exciting couple days here to kick off free agency.
Remember we talked about Milton Williams and how the Patriots upped their offer after the tweets and whatnot? Mm-hmm. Well, I had a few teams reach out, like, where is your information going? How do we track that? I'm like, ESPN alerts. You could sign up for the Adam Schefter ESPN alerts right now. We're posting on Instagram. We're posting on Threads. Like, that's where the information is going to be. Instagram, Threads, and ESPN alerts. Like, that was it. You couldn't get through. It was maddening having Twitter go on and off. Anyway, hopefully, like I said, back to normal. All right. Ty Schmit, thank you very much for hosting this week's Weekly Six Pack. Want to thank my great producer, Dan Stanzik. Want to thank you, the listener, for tuning into another Adam Schefter podcast. We'll be back in this spot next week again to celebrate the new year, to look back at all the moves that continue to unfold, all the information and insight that we have. Until then, have a great week, everybody. Happy New Year.